The thing about Vesper's landing, and really, this applies to most interstellar way station hubs floating at the edge of contested space, is that nothing ever goes smoothly. Not the docking procedures, not the cargo manifests, and definitely not the days when some diplomatic envoy decides to bring their family along for the ride. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Cassidy had been working the docks for 3 months now, which made her practically a veteran by human standards and an absolute infant by everyone else's. She'd learned quickly that keeping your head down, your manifest updated, and your sense of humor intact were the 3 keys to survival out here. The 4th key, which nobody mentioned in the orientation packet, was not panicking when things went sideways. Things were about to go very, very sideways. "Cargo Bay 5, we have a situation," crackled through her comm unit, and Cassidy looked up from the crate of medical supplies she had been scanning. The voice on the other end belonged to one of the Trilaxian dock supervisors, and Trilaxians didn't get excited easily. Their species had approximately 3 emotional settings: mildly concerned, significantly concerned, and already dead. This one sounded significantly concerned. "Define situation," Cassidy replied, already moving toward Bay 5. Around her, the usual organized chaos of the loading docks continued. Servo lifts humming, cargo containers scraping against deck plating, and at least 6 different languages being shouted simultaneously. The universal translator in her ear did its best to keep up, but sometimes it just gave up and fed her a string of angry beeping noises. "Containment failure on the diplomatic transport. Passenger has escaped." Cassidy broke into a jog. "What kind of passenger?" There was a pause that lasted just a hair too long. "Kalnith, juvenile." "Oh, fantastic." The Kalnith were what happened when evolution looked at feline apex predators, gave them 8 feet of height, triple-jointed limbs that could bend in ways that made human spines ache just watching, and enough bite force to crack hull plating. They were also, to be fair, generally reasonable people, which is exactly what you'd expect from a species that had no natural predators and thus no evolutionary pressure to be paranoid. Their children, however, were a different story. Cassidy rounded the corner into Cargo Bay 5 and immediately understood why the Trilaxian supervisor had upgraded to significantly concerned. The bay had cleared out faster than a ship with a hull breach, with workers scrambling up maintenance ladders and diving behind cargo containers like it was a station-wide drill. In the center of the chaos, near a diplomatic transport with its side hatch hanging open at an unfortunate angle, was the cause of all this excitement. The Kalnith cub was, by the standards of its species, absolutely adorable. By the standards of literally everyone else in the galaxy, it was a snarling ball of fur, fangs and claws, roughly the size of a large wolf, with eyes that reflected the bay's overhead lights like twin amber search beams. It was hissing, a sound that started somewhere in the subsonic range and climbed until Cassidy's back teeth ached. And its shoulder blades were doing that thing that cat shoulder blades do when they're about to pounce. Station security had formed a perimeter at a respectful distance of about 20 feet, which told Cassidy everything she needed to know about how this was going. They had their shock sticks out, but weren't approaching, and the one in charge, a Venkari with the kind of facial expression that suggested he was reconsidering his career choices, was trying to reach someone on his comm unit. The cub's head swiveled, tracking movement, and Cassidy could practically see its little predator brain calculating trajectories. It was terrified, which made sense. Nothing liked being in a strange place with strange smells and loud noises. The fact that it was a creature specifically designed by millions of years of evolution to respond to fear with violence was just, well, unfortunate timing. "Nobody move," Cassidy said quietly, which was probably the most pointless instruction she'd ever given, considering everyone was already frozen like statues. The cub's ears flattened against its skull, its haunches bunched. And then it launched itself directly at Cassidy's legs. Now, here's where things get interesting. Because what happened next would be analyzed, dissected, and argued about in xenopsychology papers for the next 5 years. A Kalnith cub attacking wasn't unusual. They practiced hunting behaviors from the moment they could walk. What was unusual was what Cassidy did in response. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she dropped into a crouch, opened her arms, and caught roughly 60 pounds of claws and teeth, mid-leap, with the kind of timing that would have made a baseball catcher jealous. The cub hit her with enough force to make her grunt, but Cassidy had grown up wrangling calves during branding season back on the ranch in Montana, and this wasn't all that different, except for the part where calves didn't have retractable claws. She absorbed the impact, let the momentum carry her around in a half-spin, and ended up with an armful of extremely confused predator. "Gotcha," Cassidy said, grinning like an idiot, and then, because apparently today was the day her brain decided to completely abandon all pretense of self-preservation, she spun around again, holding the cub like it was a particularly fluffy toddler. "Whoa, you've got some serious airtime there, buddy." The cub, which had been prepared for either a fight or a meal, made a sound that started as a growl and somehow transformed mid-note into something closer to a questioning chirrup. Its claws, which had been extended and ready for combat, slowly retracted. The hissing stopped. And then, this was the part that would later be described by witnesses as biologically improbable and potentially the dumbest thing ever recorded. The cub started purring. The sound was less like a house cat and more like a small combustion engine, a deep rumbling that Cassidy could feel vibrating through her chest, but it was unmistakably the sound of a content apex predator. "There we go," Cassidy said, scratching behind one of the cub's ears, which were still the size of her palm. "You're not so scary, are you? Just got a little spooked. Happens to the best of us." The silence in Cargo Bay 5 was so complete that Cassidy could hear the air recyclers humming in the walls. She looked up to find approximately 30 different species staring at her, with expressions that ranged from shock to horror to what might have been religious awakening. The Venakari security chief had his mouth hanging open, which was notable because Venakari didn't have particularly flexible jaw structures. One of the dock workers had apparently frozen in the middle of climbing a ladder and was still hanging there like a piece of forgotten laundry. Cassidy said, "Someone want to tell me where this little guy's parents are?" As if summoned by the question, the diplomatic transport's main hatch cycled open with a hiss of pressurized air, and 2 adult Kalnith emerged at a speed that suggested they'd been trying to override the door controls. The male was wearing what Cassidy had learned to recognize as formal diplomatic attire, a series of interwoven sashes that somehow managed to look both elegant and practical. The female was slightly smaller but moved with the kind of liquid grace that suggested she could remove someone's head before they finished blinking. They were also both radiating the kind of parental panic that transcended species boundaries. "Where is—" the male started, and then stopped dead as he spotted Cassidy standing in the middle of the bay, still holding their offspring like a slightly oversized house cat. The cub, hearing its father's voice, perked up and made a happy chirping sound that was absolutely at odds with the fact that it could probably bite through Cassidy's arm if it felt like it. "Oh, thank the void," the female said, and her voice carried the kind of relief that only a parent who'd just had their kid escape on a space station could muster. She covered the distance between them in 3 long strides that shouldn't have been physically possible, and Cassidy found herself being loomed over by 8 feet of concerned predator. For just a second, some very old and very smart part of Cassidy's hindbrain, the part that had kept her ancestors alive on the African savanna, suggested that maybe, possibly, she should be concerned about this situation. She told that part of her brain to shut up and handed the cub over. "Your kid's got some impressive hops on him," Cassidy said, brushing some fur off her uniform. "Might want to tire him out a bit before putting him on transport. Ships, though, the whole strange place with loud noises thing seems to get him a little wound up." The female Kalneath took her offspring with the kind of careful reverence usually reserved for live explosives, and the cub immediately started trying to climb onto her head, chirping happily. The male was staring at Cassidy with an expression that the translator couldn't quite parse, but that Cassidy suspected was somewhere between confused and having an existential crisis. "You," he started, then paused, then tried again. "You caught him." "Well, yeah," Cassidy said, because what else was she supposed to say? Let him tackle me? That seemed rude. He was attacking. "He was scared," Cassidy corrected, watching the cub now happily perched on his mother's shoulders, looking extremely pleased with himself. "There's a difference. Scared animals just need to know they're safe. Usually works better than, shock sticks and yelling." The male Kalneath opened his mouth, closed it, and then looked at his mate with an expression that clearly said, "Are you seeing this too, or did the transport's life support malfunction and I'm hallucinating?" The female was studying Cassidy with the kind of intensity usually reserved for particularly interesting specimens. "You are human," she said, and it wasn't quite a question. "Last time I checked, yeah." "And you regularly interact with predator species on your home world?" Cassidy thought about her childhood spent helping with the ranch, about the time she'd volunteered at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center during college, about the distinctly memorable summer she'd spent working at a big cat sanctuary that probably violated at least 6 safety regulations. "I mean," she said, "not exclusively predators. We've got a pretty good variety. But yeah, I guess you could say we're kind of used to it." The security chief finally found his voice. "Used to it," he repeated, and his translator was definitely working overtime on the incredulity. "You caught a Kalneath juvenile mid-attack like it was a recreational activity." "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds way more dramatic than it was," Cassidy said. "He's just a kid. Kids do dumb stuff when they're scared. That's pretty much universal, right?" The male Kalneath made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "I am Ambassador Nalquin," he said, apparently deciding that formal introductions were necessary at this point. "This is my mate, consort Wendy, and our son, who just attempted to maul you, is apparently now attempting to groom his mother's head fur." Cassidy looked, and, sure enough, the cub was industriously licking the top of Wendy's head with a tongue that looked like it could sand metal. "He's a cutie," she said, and meant it. "What's his name?" There was another one of those pauses that suggested Cassidy had just said something either incredibly profound or incredibly stupid, and the jury was still out on which. "He does not yet have a formal designation," Nalquin said carefully. "Kalneath young receive their names after their first successful hunt." "Huh, that's actually pretty cool," Cassidy said. "Well, until then, maybe keep a better eye on your hatch mechanisms. The automatic locks on these diplomatic transports can be finicky if the pressure seals aren't calibrated right. She turned to head back to her actual job. The medical supplies weren't going to manifest themselves, but Wendy's voice stopped her. Human Cassidy. Cassidy turned back. Just Cassidy's fine. You were not afraid. It was a statement, not a question. But Cassidy heard the real question underneath it. Sure I was, Cassidy said honestly. Fear's not the problem. It's what you do with it that matters. She grinned. Plus, I've been scratched by barn cats that were meaner than your little guy there. He's all bluster. The cub, as if understanding that his reputation was being maligned, puffed up and tried to look threatening while still clinging to his mother's head. The effect was somewhat undermined by the fact that his tongue was still sticking out. Cassidy laughed, waved, and headed back toward her cargo manifest, leaving behind a cargo bay full of stunned aliens and one very confused diplomatic family. It would be another 20 minutes before someone thought to check the security footage. By the time the shift supervisor pulled up the recording and watched a human cargo specialist catch an apex predator juvenile mid-leap, spin around while laughing, and then hand it back to its parents like she was returning a borrowed wrench, the video had already been copied to 15 different personal files. By the end of the hour, it had spread to 3 different departments. By the end of the day, it had been uploaded to the station's public network. And by the end of the week, Cassidy was going to discover that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in the galaxy isn't fighting monsters. It's treating them like they're not monsters at all. The video hit the Galactic network like a meteor strike. Within 6 hours, Cassidy's impromptu wildlife handling demonstration had been viewed approximately 3 million times across 18 different species communication platforms. Within 12 hours, that number had quadrupled. By the time Cassidy finished her shift and stumbled back to her quarters, she had 86 messages waiting on her personal comm unit and absolutely no idea why. What the hell? She muttered, scrolling through requests for interviews, commentary from xenobiologists she'd never heard of, and at least a dozen messages that the translator was marking as cultural context unclear, possibly marriage proposals. The next morning, she found out exactly what had happened when she walked into the dock supervisor's office for her usual shift briefing and found herself facing not her supervisor, but the station's media liaison officer, a Trilaxian named Vexel, who looked like he hadn't slept in approximately 20 hours. "You're famous," he said without preamble. "I'm what now?" Vexel pulled up a holographic display, and there it was. Cassidy, frozen mid-spin, holding what the caption described as a juvenile Kalnith apex predator, like she was dancing with a particularly enthusiastic partner. The view counter at the bottom was climbing so fast the numbers were blurring. "Oh," Cassidy said. "Oh no." "Oh yes," Vexel replied. "The Kalnith Embassy has received 300 requests for comment. The Interspecies Biology Council wants to study you, and someone from the Morthene Collective called you," he checked his notes, "either insane or the most dangerous human in known space, which I'm told is actually a compliment in their culture." Cassidy sat down heavily in the nearest chair. "I just didn't want the kid to get hurt." "You caught an attacking predator mid-leap and laughed about it," Vexel said, and there was something in his voice that might have been awe or horror, possibly both. "Do you understand how that looks to species who spend their entire evolutionary history either hunting or being hunted?" Before Cassidy could answer, her comm unit chimed with an incoming priority message. The sender ID made Vexel's eyes widen. "Ambassador Nalquin." The message was brief. "Human Cassidy, my family would be honored if you would join us for a private dinner this evening. We have many questions about your species' relationship with predatory fauna. Please bring documentation of these pets you mentioned. Cassidy looked at Vexel. Vexel looked at Cassidy. Your shift supervisor says you're cleared for diplomatic duties today, he said quietly. Apparently, this is now considered vital to interspecies relations. I just work cargo, Cassidy protested weakly. You worked cargo, Vexel corrected. Now you're apparently humanity's ambassador to every species that has teeth. 6 hours later, Cassidy found herself in the station's diplomatic quarter, wearing the nicest clothes she owned, which wasn't saying much, and carrying a datapad loaded with pictures from home. Pictures of her family's ranch, of the barn cats that ruled the property with iron paws, of the time her brother had bottle-fed an orphaned fox kit, and pictures, God's help her, of the summer she'd worked at that big cat sanctuary. Ambassador Nalquin opened the door personally, and behind him, Cassidy could see a dining room that had been set for what looked like a dozen guests. "Welcome," Nalquin said. "I should warn you. Word spread quickly about our invitation. Several other ambassadors requested to attend." He paused. "I believe the phrase your species uses is, 'This might be a long night.'" Cassidy took a deep breath, clutched her datapad, and stepped inside. She had no idea that by the end of the evening, she'd have accidentally started 3 diplomatic incidents, impressed 2 warrior cultures, and somehow ended up agreeing to go hunting. But that, as they say, was a problem for future Cassidy. The dining room was less a room and more a carefully orchestrated exercise in interspecies diplomacy, which is to say it looked like someone had tried to accommodate 6 different biological requirements simultaneously and mostly succeeded. The table itself was adjustable height. The chairs ranged from normal to what is even the anatomy here, and the lighting could apparently shift spectrum based on who was looking at it. Cassidy counted 9 aliens around the table, representing 6 different species, and every single one of them was staring at her like she was either a fascinating specimen or a statistical anomaly that had somehow achieved sentience. "Right," she said, settling into her chair. "So this is happening." Ambassador Nalquin, seated at the head of the table with Wendy beside him, and their cub currently napping in what looked like a very expensive diplomatic bassinet, gestured to the assembled guests. "Allow me to make introductions. To your left is Councillor Thex Ali of the Lunbray Collective." The Lunbray was, and Cassidy was trying very hard not to stare, approximately 4 feet of chitin, compound eyes, and too many limbs. The translator rendered her voice as melodic and vaguely feminine. "A pleasure, human Cassidy. Your species' approach to threat assessment is novel." "Thanks," Cassidy said, "because what else do you say to that?" Beside her is Commander Velnok of the Barreen Alliance. The Barreen was tall, gray-skinned, with eyes that sat on the sides of his head in a way that screamed, "Pray, species ancestry." He nodded politely but didn't speak. "And to your right," Nalquin continued, "is Battlemaster Quun of the Morthine Collective." Cassidy turned and found herself looking at approximately 6.5 feet of reptilian muscle, scales that seemed to shift colors in the light, and eyes that evaluated her with the kind of intensity usually reserved for weapon systems analysis. The Morthine wore armor that looked ceremonial, but probably functioned just fine in actual combat. And when he smiled, Cassidy counted at least 3 rows of teeth. "Human," Quun said, and his voice was like gravel being crushed under tank treads. "I have watched your video encounter 83 times. I am undecided if you are brave or foolish." "Little of both, probably," Cassidy admitted. The dinner started with what Nalquin called light refreshments, which turned out to be a spread of foods that Cassidy's digestive system would hopefully tolerate. She'd learned early in her station tenure that edible to humans was a pretty broad category, but tastes good to humans was significantly narrower. "So," Counselor Thexali said, mandibles clicking in what the translator suggested was curiosity, "is it true that humans keep predatory species in their domiciles? Voluntarily?" Cassidy pulled out her datapad. "Oh yeah, super common. Here, let me show you." She pulled up a picture of her family's ranch, specifically the barn where approximately 15 cats of various sizes and temperaments ruled like furry little tyrants. "These are barn cats. We keep them around because they hunt rodents. They're technically predators, but we've been living with them for thousands of years." The Lunbray leaned closer, compound eyes somehow conveying fascination. "And they do not attack you? I mean, sometimes they scratch if you pet them wrong, but mostly they just want food and warm places to sleep." Cassidy swiped to another picture. "This is my brother bottle-feeding a fox kit we found after its mother got hit by a vehicle. We raised it until it was old enough to release back into the wild." Commander Velnok made a sound that the translator rendered as concerned whistling. "You took a predator offspring into your dwelling and nurtured it." "Well, yeah, it was a baby. What were we supposed to do? Let it starve?" The silence that followed suggested that, yes, actually, that was exactly what most species would have done. "Fascinating," Counselor Thex Ali said quietly. "The Lunbray maintain strict pest elimination protocols. The concept of preserving a potential threat is foreign to us." Cassidy scrolled through more pictures. Dogs playing fetch. A cat sleeping on a keyboard. Someone's pet parrot. Each image seemed to deepen the aliens' confusion. But it was the next series of photos that really caused problems. This is from the summer I worked at a big cat sanctuary," Cassidy said, pulling up an image of herself, considerably younger, considerably more sunburned, standing next to a fully grown tiger. "We rehabilitated injured or rescued animals. This guy had been kept illegally as a pet and needed socialization before we could—" "Stop," Battlemaster Quoon said, and his voice carried enough command weight that Cassidy actually froze mid-swipe. "That creature, how much does it weigh?" Benny was about 500 pounds. Pretty average for a male Bengal tiger." "And you are touching it? I mean, yeah, we had to do health checks, enrichment activities. It could kill you." "Well, sure, if he wanted to," Cassidy agreed, "but he didn't want to. We had an understanding. I brought him food and scratched behind his ears, and he didn't eat me. Pretty good deal for everyone involved." Battlemaster Quun stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a blade being sharpened. "You are telling me that humans regularly interact with predators capable of killing them for recreational purposes?" "I mean, I wouldn't say regularly. The video shows you catching a Kalanith juvenile while laughing." He was scared. "My species has a saying," Quun interrupted, and his voice had dropped to something that made the translator add warning indicators. "The measure of a warrior is not found in victory over the weak, but in understanding when to draw one's blade." He fixed Cassidy with a stare that could have melted hull plating. "You show images of yourself with apex predators. You treat threat as invitation. You laugh in the face of death. I really don't think it's that dramatic. I challenge you to a hunt." The room went silent except for the ambient hum of the station's life support systems. Ambassador Nulquin cleared his throat. "Battlemaster Quun, perhaps this is not the appropriate venue. The human claims her species understands predators, Kwon said, not breaking eye contact with Cassidy. Let her prove this understanding in the traditional way of my people. A hunt on the proving grounds. Prey of my choosing. He smiled, showing all those teeth. If she survives with honor, I will acknowledge human capability. If she fails, well, at least she will have an interesting death. Cassidy looked around the table. Ambassador Nalquin looked somewhere between apologetic and fascinated. Wendy was watching with the intensity of someone taking mental notes. Commander Velnok had his head in his hands. Counselor Thexali's antennae were vibrating in what might have been excitement. Just to clarify, Cassidy said slowly, you want me to go hunting with you because I showed you pictures of my summer job. I want to see if humans are truly fearless or merely ignorant of their own mortality. Pretty sure it's the second one, but okay. You accept? Cassidy thought about her shift supervisor, who was going to have an aneurysm. She thought about her mother, who had always said Cassidy's curiosity would get her killed someday. She thought about the fact that she had absolutely no combat training, no hunting experience beyond helping her dad track an injured deer one winter, and no idea what she was getting into. Sure, she said. Why not? Not like I had plans this weekend anyway. Battlemaster Kwon's smile widened. Excellent. We hunt in 3 days. The prey is a void stalker, 12 feet, optical camouflage, ambush predator. It has killed 2 Morthene warriors in training hunts. He paused. They survived, but barely. Cool, Cassidy said, wondering if the station had any sort of insurance policy for this kind of thing. Do I need to bring anything, or bring whatever tools you believe will aid you? I will bring my honor guard. The hunt begins at dawn, station time. After the dinner finally ended, and Cassidy had accidentally started 2 more diplomatic incidents by showing a video of someone's pet snake and explaining the concept of dog parks, she stumbled back toward her quarters in a daze. Her comm unit buzzed. The caller ID showed Lieutenant Bo, the only other human currently stationed on Vesper's Landing, and one of the navigation officers she occasionally grabbed coffee with. Please tell me you didn't just agree to go hunting with a Morthene battlemaster, Bo said the moment she answered. How did you already know about that? Cassidy, everyone knows about that. It's been on the station news feed for the last 20 minutes. They're calling it the human trial and setting up betting pools. Fantastic. What were you thinking? Cassidy laughed, and it sounded slightly unhinged even to her own ears. Honestly, Bo, I have no idea. But I caught a baby predator while everyone else was panicking, and somehow that turned into the intergalactic fame. So at this point, I'm just rolling with it. You're going to get yourself killed. Probably not. The Morthene guy said the other warriors survived. Barely, Cassidy. He said they survived barely. I'll figure something out. I always do. You've been in space for 3 months, and I've been dealing with ornery animals my whole life. How different can it be? Bo's sigh was long-suffering and deeply familiar. It was the same sigh Cassidy had been hearing from people her entire life, usually right before she did something inadvisable and somehow got away with it. Fine, I'll help you prepare. But for the record, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen someone agree to. And I once watched a maintenance worker try to fix a plasma conduit with his bare hands. Did he survive? That's not the point. 3 days later, Cassidy stood at the shuttle bay, wearing borrowed field gear that almost fit, carrying a pack full of supplies that Bo had insisted she bring, and facing down a hunting party that included Battlemaster Kwon and 2 of his warrior caste. The Morthene looked at her like they were already composing her eulogy. Cassidy looked at the shuttle that would take them to the hunting moon and thought about Benny the tiger, about catching scared barn cats, about every animal she'd ever worked with that everyone said was too dangerous to approach. "Right," she said. "Let's go not die, I guess." The shuttle doors closed behind them, and Vesper's Landing began taking bets on whether she'd last more than an hour. The hunting moon was exactly the kind of place that made Cassidy wonder why intelligent species kept insisting on proving themselves in the most dangerous environments possible. Dense jungle. Check. Low gravity that made every step feel slightly wrong. Check. Bioluminescent flora that looked beautiful and probably wanted to digest you. Check. Also, something was watching them from the trees, and Cassidy was pretty sure it wasn't friendly. "The Void Stalker was released 6 hours ago," Battlemaster Quinn announced, his voice carrying easily in the humid air. "It will have established territory by now. The hunt begins." He looked at his 2 warriors, both of whom looked like they could bench press a cargo container, and then at Cassidy. "Do not stray far from the group, human. I would prefer you survive long enough to demonstrate your species' alleged capabilities." "Appreciate the vote of confidence," Cassidy muttered, adjusting her pack. Bo had loaded it with everything from emergency rations to a basic med kit to something he'd called a personal shield generator that Cassidy wasn't entirely sure how to operate. She also had a knife, a scanner that supposedly detected movement, and a growing sense that this had been a terrible idea. The Morthine moved through the jungle like they were born to it, which they probably were. Their honor demanded they hunt with traditional weapons, blades mostly, though one warrior carried something that looked like a spear made of metal that definitely wasn't native to any planet Cassidy knew. They moved loud, aggressive, announcing their presence like a challenge. Cassidy, meanwhile, was trying to remember everything her father had taught her about tracking. Watch the ground for signs of passage. Listen for birds going quiet. Assuming this moon had birds, which it didn't, but the principle remained. Look for disturbances in the environment. Also, try not to trip over glowing roots, which she'd already done twice. "The stalker hunts by ambush," Quinn called back. "It will observe before striking, wait for weakness, then—" The attack came from above and to the left, so fast that Cassidy's brain barely processed it. One moment, the first Morthine warrior was walking point. The next, something that bent light around itself dropped from the canopy. 12 feet of muscle and claws and teeth that made the Kulnith cub look like a house pet. The warrior got his spear up in time to avoid being disemboweled, but the force of the impact sent him sprawling backward, armor scraping against stone. The Void Stalker was already gone, vanishing back into the undergrowth before anyone could react. "First blood to the prey," Quinn said calmly, helping his warrior up. The younger Morthine had 3 gouges across his chest plate, deep enough that Cassidy could see the underlayer. "It tests us. This is expected." "Expected?" Cassidy said. "That thing moves like physics is just a suggestion." "Yes," Quinn agreed. "This is why it is worthy prey." They continued deeper into the jungle, and Cassidy started noticing things. Scratch marks on trees at exactly the same height, about 10 feet up. Disturbed vegetation in a pattern that suggested regular passage. And, this was interesting, what looked like territorial marking, the same kind of behavior she'd seen in big cats back home. "Question," Cassidy said. "How often do these hunts happen on this moon?" "Monthly," Quinn replied. "It is our proving ground. Young warriors face the stalker to earn their place in the warrior caste." "And how often do stalkers breed?" Quinn stopped walking. Slowly, he turned to look at her. What? Breeding cycles. When do they reproduce? Because those marks on the trees look territorial, and that's usually either about food sources or... The second attack came fast, but this time Cassidy was watching for it. The stalker dropped from a different angle, targeting the second warrior, and Cassidy saw what she'd missed before. The shimmer of light bending, the slight distortion that marked where the creature actually was, versus where it appeared to be. The warrior went down hard, the stalker's claws raking across his shoulder guard. Quan was moving before Cassidy could blink, his blade singing through the air. But the stalker was already disengaging, melting back into the jungle. "Second strike," Quan said, and for the first time, Cassidy heard something in his voice that might have been frustration. "It picks us apart, one at a time." "Because you're loud," Cassidy said. "You're announcing your presence like a challenge, and it's treating you like territorial invaders. It's not hunting you for food, it's defending something." Quan's eyes narrowed. "You believe the stalker is protecting territory." "I think it's protecting a nest." The silence that followed was broken only by the ambient sounds of the jungle and the heavy breathing of the injured warriors. "The preserve monitoring should have detected breeding activity," Quan said slowly. "Should have? Yeah. But you said these hunts happen monthly. When was the last full survey of the stalker population?" Quan's expression suggested he was having the kind of realization that made warrior cultures reconsider their traditions. 6 months ago. Right. So here's a theory. What if Mama Stalker is less interested in being worthy prey and more interested in keeping a bunch of armed warriors away from her babies? "The Morthine do not harm offspring," Quan said, and his voice carried genuine offense. "That would be..." "She doesn't know that," Cassidy interrupted. "She just knows big, scary things keep showing up in her territory once a month. From her perspective, you're the threat." One of the injured warriors made a sound that the translator rendered as a pained laugh. "The human suggests we have been harassing a mother." "The human suggests you've been picking a fight with someone who's got a really good reason to fight back," Cassidy corrected. "And if I'm right, the nest is going to be somewhere central to all those territorial markings, somewhere defensible, probably elevated, definitely within striking distance of all your approach vectors." Quan studied her for a long moment. "You wish to find the nest." "I wish to confirm that I'm right, and that you've been accidentally running the galaxy's worst neighborhood watch program on a protective parent." "And if you are correct, the hunt?" "The hunt," Cassidy said firmly, "ends. Because I'm not here to prove I can kill something. I'm here to prove that humans understand predators, and understanding predators means knowing when they're not actually the threat." Quan's smile was slow and showed every one of his teeth. "You would deny me my prey." "I'm saying your prey is just trying to raise her kids in peace, and maybe we should respect that, instead of treating her home like a combat arena." The battlemaster looked at his injured warriors, then at the jungle, then back at Cassidy. "Show me," he said finally. "Show me this nest. Prove your theory. And if you are wrong..." "If I'm wrong, the stalker probably eats me, and you get to say you were right about humans being foolish," Cassidy said. "Win-win, really." Finding the nest took 2 hours of careful tracking, following the pattern of territorial marks, watching for the subtle signs of repeated passage through the undergrowth. The Morthine followed silently now, weapons sheathed, moving with the kind of cautious respect usually reserved for approaching a temple. When they found it, Nestled in a rocky outcropping about 15 feet up and surrounded by dense vegetation, Cassidy felt a surge of vindication followed immediately by terror. Because there, in the entrance to the den, was the Void Stalker, and behind her, visible in the shadows, were three small shapes that could only be cubs. The Stalker's camouflage flickered and failed, and Cassidy got her first good look at the creature. 12 feet of apex predator, yes, but also exhausted. Scarred. One of her paws was favoring weight off an old injury. She was defending her nest against monthly incursions while trying to raise offspring, and she looked like she was about 2 missed meals away from collapse. "Oh," Kwon said softly. "Oh, we have been unforgivably blind." Cassidy slowly, carefully, lowered herself to the ground in a non-threatening crouch. The Stalker's attention snapped to her immediately, a low warning growl vibrating through the air. "Hey there," Cassidy said quietly, keeping her voice calm and even. "Sorry about all the noise. We're not here to hurt your babies, promise." The Stalker's lips pulled back, revealing teeth that could absolutely follow through on the threat they implied. Behind Cassidy, one of the Morthene warriors whispered, "She cannot understand you." "Understanding isn't just about words," Cassidy replied, not taking her eyes off the Stalker. "It's about body language, intent, and right now, I need her to understand that I'm not a threat." She slowly reached into her pack. The Stalker tensed, ready to launch, and pulled out one of the emergency ration bars. Not ideal food for an alien predator, but the scanner read it as mostly protein, and protein was usually a safe bet. Cassidy tossed it gently to the side, nowhere near the nest, giving the Stalker an option that didn't involve combat. "Peace offering. We'll leave you alone. You've got my word on that." For a long moment, nothing happened. The Stalker's eyes, multiple pairs of them, Cassidy now realized, tracked between Cassidy, the ration bar, and her cubs. Calculating? Assessing. Then, slowly, the Stalker's posture shifted from ready to kill to merely ready to kill if necessary. Not relaxed, not trusting, but no longer treating them as immediate threats. One of the cubs poked its head out of the den, making a sound that was somewhere between a chirp and a growl. The Stalker immediately pushed it back with one massive paw, but not before Cassidy got a good look. Definitely babies. Probably about 3 months old if she was reading the development correctly. "We're going now," Cassidy said, slowly standing up. "You've got a good spot here. Nice and defensive. But maybe—" She pulled out her comm unit and flagged a message to Station Wildlife Management. "Maybe someone should make sure you're not being bothered by monthly hunting parties anymore." She backed away slowly, the Morthene following her lead. The Stalker watched them retreat, never leaving her position at the den entrance. When they were finally far enough away that Cassidy's heart rate started returning to normal, Kwon spoke. "You did not kill the prey." "Nope. You did not even attempt to demonstrate dominance." "Also nope. You simply made peace with it." "I wouldn't call it peace exactly," Cassidy said. "More like a mutual understanding that neither of us wanted this fight. She's just trying to raise her kids. Why would I mess with that?" Kwon was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My people have held these hunts for 15 generations. We considered them sacred tests of worthiness. And in one afternoon, a human cargo specialist has shown us that we were simply harassing an exhausted mother." "To be fair, you didn't know," Cassidy offered. "That is precisely the point," Kwon said. "We assumed. We saw a predator and called it prey. We never questioned whether the hunt itself was honorable." He stopped walking and faced Cassidy directly. "You have taught me something today that no warrior in my bloodline has understood. True strength is not in the kill. It is in knowing when the kill serves no purpose." "I mean, I just didn't want to fight an angry mom defending her babies," Cassidy said. "That's a losing proposition, no matter who you are." When they returned to Vesper's Landing 6 hours later, Cassidy was exhausted, covered in luminescent plant residue that was probably going to stain, and definitely going to need about 12 hours of sleep. She was also, according to the crowd waiting at the shuttle bay, a legend. Ambassador Nalquin was there, with Wendy and their cub, who took one look at Cassidy and made excited chirping noises. Counselor Thex Ali was there, along with at least 30 other aliens representing species Cassidy didn't even recognize. The station's media liaison looked like he might actually cry from relief. And Battlemaster Quan, standing before the assembled crowd, made a formal declaration in his native language that the translator rendered as, "Let it be known across all Morthene space that the human Cassidy has taught us the meaning of true honor. She faced our worthiest prey not with blade, but with understanding. She ended the hunt not with death, but with wisdom. She is hereby declared a friend of the collective, and any who insult her honor insults ours." "Cool," Cassidy said weakly. "Can I go sleep now?" The next morning, she woke to 83 new messages, 5 formal dinner invitations, and a notification that the station had established new wildlife preserve protocols requiring regular breeding surveys. There was also a message from the Kolnith Embassy. "Our son has requested that his formal name be Catching Flight with Laughter in honor of your kindness. We hope this meets with your approval." And from Battlemaster Quan, "The Void Stalker and her offspring have been relocated to a protected sanctuary. Her injured paw has been treated. She attacked the medical team 4 times before allowing treatment. I believe she would like you." Cassidy laughed, which turned into a yawn, which turned into falling back asleep for another 6 hours. When she finally returned to her normal cargo duties 3 days later, she discovered that someone had installed a small plaque on her workstation. It read, "Cassidy, too stubborn to run, too curious to stay away, too kind to let fear win." Below it, in smaller text, "The galaxy wasn't ready, but then again, humanity never waits for invitations." She kept it.